Welcome everybody to another Perceptive podcast here on the Game Wisdom channel, where we examine the art and science of games. We have another great group of indie developers on tonight, and we're going to be discussing their games as well as several topics relating to game design and the industry. My guests tonight have been making games together since earlier this decade. They have worked on titles such as Anodyne, Even the Ocean, and I've also worked on games separate as well. And they're on tonight to kind of talk about what's been going on and a little bit about their upcoming game, Anodyne 2. So please welcome to the cast, Sean Tani and Marina Kataka.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, it's great to have both of you on. How are you doing this evening?
Good. Just working today, as usual.
Yep. Regular day. Very cold.
I know
yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
I think it's like 5 right now over here, so I'm nice and warm in my little computer den, so at least that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
But it's great to have both of you on for tonight. As we were just talking about before we started the cast, I had a chance to play through Anodyne 1 and the preview build of Anodyne 2. And both are very interesting games. I haven't had a chance to play the other games.
Both are very interesting.
There you go. I know, it always pops up like that. But they're both very interesting, and we certainly have a lot to discuss tonight. So, to begin with, since this is both of your first times on for this cast, could you talk a little bit about kind of your background, and also what kind of games do you like to design?
Yeah. My background is I started with a little bit of like cave story modding and programming games during high school and like middle school, and in college I started kind of learning how to program games because I was majoring in computer science. And then during college I started working on Anodyne and met Marina, and then it kind of went from there. And I've mostly been interested in mostly adventure games, but also recently like kind of narrative heavy games that are kind of like relevant to contemporary events, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and my background is, I guess, kind of as sort of like a kid, maybe middle school age. I was into like the early like game maker games that I like found online and the community surrounding that, and some other like little sort of like hobbyist game communities. And I didn't really make a lot of games though until I met Sean in college. I kind of had a bunch of little like semi-started projects, mostly focused on like art and stuff like that, because I'm like more on the art side than the programming side. And then yeah, like as far as what I like to make, I think games that I guess have something sort of visually interesting going on, and create like an interesting mood, I guess I would say is a highlight, and then storytelling in general too.
Okay. Now, for both of you, was Anodyne kind of like your first like full game project, or did you work on other games before then?
I had made a handful of small games in the past, in the year before Anodyne started, and then I released a small Flash platformer called Inspiration Day, which I actually played through yesterday. I don't know why I did, but it was late at night. And I got some money for that, but that was pretty much it. So about a year of like serious, like I guess I don't know if you say serious, but a year of trying to make games before starting Anodyne.
Yeah, and then like I was saying, like I basically had been trying to make games or making kind of like snippets of things. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Snippets of things for, I don't know, 10, 15 years or so, but Anodyne was definitely the first project that kind of cohered into anything sort of finished feeling.
Mm-hmm. And Anodyne, again, was a very interesting game, like from what I played. For people watching us live or recorded right now, we don't have any footage of the first game. There is footage of the second one. But with the first game, it was kind of a melding, again, of like a very interesting story with the Zelda kind of design and structure. I guess for both of you, I guess what attracted you to that kind of Zelda design for Anodyne?
So I started out working on Anodyne by myself first, for like 2 or 3 months, and at that time, I kind of thought that it would be easier to make as like a minimal Zelda-like, only like a few, with like a smaller screen size, because I was working by myself at the time, and it would be easier to do the pixel art, even though what I made in the end wasn't that good before Marina came on. So that was kind of the interest. I had always kind of liked the Oracle of Seasons games and Link's Awakening, and there's like a sense of mystery to that kind of square aspect ratio with a very like zoomed in camera feel. So it kind of gives this, it lends itself very nicely to these like kind of surreal feelings of exploration, which was something I wanted to do, having played the Japanese indie game Yume Nikki, which is kind of like a surreal exploration RPG Maker game.
Okay. Now, with Anodyne, was that done in Game Maker or was that done with another engine?
Anodyne was done in Flixel, which is an open source ActionScript 3 engine that compiles to Flash.
All right. Now, with Anodyne, I know the both of you have worked on games together as well as released some of your own games from the email you sent me. So I know both of you have your own itch.io pages. I guess, what kind of games do you like to make in your spare times when you're kind of like working on them alone?
I kind of have like a hodgepodge of solo projects. I don't know if there's like a really strong theme. When I'm working on a game by myself, it'll probably be a small thing so that I can code it and not have it kind of get too complicated. Mostly lately, I've been using Construct, which is like a kind of simple-ish game engine. And I guess, yeah, so they've been sort of short vignette games. I made a game called Brativism that was had this really kind of interesting like painterly style, and you play as this strange dolphin character who creates an abstract painting by throwing a tantrum. And so I guess I like to just create a little something that's maybe unexpected and evokes some sort of like feelings, or just like expresses something that I want to like get out.
All right. And for you, Sean?
I'm sorry, I'm linking Brativism in the chat for everyone. So there's been a few small projects. There's one that I kind of like stopped because I started it in the middle of Even the Ocean development, and then that ended up just being a weird music album. But I've always kind of been interested in addressing or like discussing ideas relating to like race in America. So things related to the various groups of like Asians. So that was what All Our Asians was about, which I made over the course of a year. Recently, I'm also interested in ideas kind of relating to like issues around kind of the challenges that boys face growing up, kind of the expectations placed on them, and how that can kind of lead to certain kinds of I guess you could say relationship dynamics that may not be healthy for the boy or the guy. But that's kind of being saved for like later projects. But I'm also interested in generally just exploring kind of lo-fi, like low poly kind of PlayStation-ish 3D graphics, which I did through All Our Ages, and we're also doing through Anodyne too. And kind of giving people these very interesting like places to explore. And I think Anodyne 2 does that really well.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of those like three things right now.
I guess with that kind of lo-fi aesthetic for Anodyne 2, there's also a question in chat about going with like having multiple art styles. What attracted you to making something in that kind of lo-fi look for today's market?
So I was actually reading through like old emails about Anodyne 2 planning. Originally, it was going to be all 3D, but based on how certain ideas evolved, we actually decided to start making certain aspects of the game only in 2D. And so it allows us to 2D and 3D. You can be lo-fi with both of them. Like in 2D, you can have that kind of Game Boy aspect ratio, and 3D, you can kind of have like low poly stuff. And those allow you to achieve different things, I guess, aesthetically. And so it just so happened to fit into the idea of shrinking that it would work better in 2D, and to kind of have more of an overworld exploration feel for the 3D sections.
Okay. And another question from Mike. He was just asking, are you both working on games full-time?
Yeah, well, I've kind of been going in and out of working on games full-time over the past couple of years. I've sometimes had kind of just odd customer service jobs, or occasionally doing some like freelance art or design, but currently I'm working full-time on Anodyne 2.
Yeah, I am working full-time on Anodyne 2, but I do, for the past 5 semesters, I've been teaching like about a part-time job's worth of work a week at a teaching game design or game music composition at a art school in Chicago to masters and college students.
Great.
For like side money. But otherwise, yeah, full-time.
All right. And one thing that I wanted to touch on, as you were talking about, Sean, with developing games around interesting or stories that aren't normally being told. I think I find that very fascinating with all the independent developers I've had a chance to speak to over like the last, I guess at this point we're going on 7 years now in terms of podcasts I've done. And
Wow.
like the independent space has really been, I think, a great medium for developers to tell these unique stories. I'm trying to think of a few other ones off the top of my head. For those of you who don't know, we've been doing a indie game spotlight stream every month, starting from, I think it was up 2 months ago, where I play games submitted by developers. Like either they are professionals or first timers or even students. And we've certainly seen just a very wide berth in terms of design. And I think it's very interesting about one, I think, Marv, that has been very much trying to grow, be represented, has been the LGBTQ plus market, or people of that nature. We've seen so many games from independent developers trying to tell stories around them. And it's something that we really don't see, at least for right now, in the AAA space.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think there's actually a book or a Kickstarter for a book about. There's always, I mean, I'm not the most familiar, but there's definitely been a history of games around those topics, but I think they have mostly been like independent endeavors, from what I know. Do you remember what it was called, Marina? The Rainbow Arcade or something? The book?
Yeah, I think that was what it was called.
Yeah.
I guess for both of you, besides working on your games and of course Anodyne 2, what kind of genres, I guess, attract you, like from a gameplay perspective? Like games you like to play, in your spare time.
I guess I just put the Rainbow Arcade link in the chat. What I find myself playing a lot of the time are the kind of like procedurally generated, like roguelite kind of things. In college, I was really, really into The Binding of Isaac and recently I've been playing like Dead Cells. I don't know. That's kind of what jumps out right now.
All right. And for you, Sean?
Marina also likes to play the Crypt of the Necrodancer, right? And, like,
that's another one of those.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite games because I got like a dance mat for it. So
Nice.
when it's like cold outside but I want to like exercise, I'll play Crypt of the Necrodancer.
I tend to, I think, almost exclusively gravitate towards like RPGs or games that are very like character or story driven. I don't really like games that don't have words, I guess. Although if it was something like Anodyne, I guess that would be fine. Yeah, mostly RPGs, games with like stories are nice. Like last year I was playing Nier and Nier Automata, Drakengard 3. We played through Final Fantasy X, Resonance of Fate, a lot of RPG games. Things just anything with writing, I guess. I don't really like. It's kind of funny. I don't like procedurally generated games. They make me too nervous because you know how you get to the end and you're like you might die. I don't know. I can't do it. Although I every now and then I start playing like gacha games on phones, they're all bad, but I don't know. Anyways, I'm not playing one right now, thankfully, because I need to finish this game.
Yeah, as fans of Game Wisdom are watching us right now, they know that we've certainly played a number of roguelikes here on the channel. Binding of Isaac's one of my favorites. I even put in my first book that I wrote about 20 essential games. And like with Crypt of the Necrodancer, that one is beyond me. I have no musical rhythm whatsoever, so that's like the one roguelike that I just cannot play at all these days. Let's see. Yeah, I guess here's Mojo was bringing up a cultist simulator, and I know that's kind of like a very weird mix of kind of a roguelike, but still like very much like a visual novel, very much a narrative-heavy game. I guess for you, Sean, in terms of like narratives in video games, I guess what would be like some of like your favorite kinds of stories that we see in video games? Because I mean, there are an incalculable amount that we can tell in a game.
Right.
I guess what kind of stories like drive you to play through a game?
I would say that I probably gravitate more towards like the fixed stories, or like games with like kind of a fixed through line that maybe you can kind of influence a little bit, but ultimately the choices don't matter that much. Kind of like Kentucky Route Zero as a really good example. Like the dialogue choices you make do change what you read, and maybe they affect something 10 hours later, but I think the endings are always kind of the same. I kind of like that straight through line. So I like things that kind of touch on themes that are based in reality. Like, I don't know, I like reading fiction or novels that are kind of like contemporary settings. People living in like cities or like that kind of stuff. But I guess I don't know. I guess I would also like just a sci-fi story are also fun. Like has anyone read like the Three Body Problem trilogy? Sci-fi trilogy. Anyways, that's just like it's like a sci-fi trilogy that's about humans and aliens coming. It sounds really boring, but it actually has a lot of really great set pieces. So I guess that I would just be interested in because it's like fun. But in terms of like themes, I care a little more about stuff that is like based on what's happening right now. Yeah.
All right.
I think for me, a game story that jumped out recently was Butterfly Soup, which is a visual novel.
That's a good example.
Yeah, I just thought it's a really like fun game with a lot of like funny dialogue, and it's really cute and sweet. And kind of like going back to how you're talking about LGBT representation and also like race. It's interesting because it focuses on these Asian American girls who are mostly like kind of like gay or bi and just like figuring stuff out in their little fun friend group. So that's a fun game. Butterfly Soup.
All right. And another question for you, Marina, regarding like the roguelikes that you like to play. You mentioned, of course, Binding of Isaac and Dead Cells Crypt of the Necrodancer. That's not easy to say very fast.
Yeah.
But do you prefer those that are more on the action side of things, again, like those titles, or there are, of course, a lot of like classical or classic style roguelikes, more like the turn-based variety?
Yeah, I think I definitely do like the action. Part of it is that the action-oriented ones maybe feel a little less daunting because they often don't have as complicated of like sort of like stats and item stuff going on, and it's more about just like playing an action game but getting into this kind of weird loop where you're just kind of almost on autopilot in a way. I don't know why my brain just kind of like desires that. Doesn't want to like think that hard, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of a lot of the classic style ones as well. I just find the UI tends to rub me the wrong way when I play them. Like, again, it just gets really like distracting when you're trying to read like all kinds of stats and kind of like the one thing that I just have no, like, I didn't play them, so I don't have any like fondness for is like the old school like isometric roguelikes where it's very like it's a step by step kind of a flow to it.
Yeah, yeah. Have you played 868 Hack by Michael Roth? Is that how you say it? I don't know.
No.
That's a really interesting one. That's pretty simple, but also it is actually like turn-based and not action, but I like it a lot. And Michael has done a bunch of different really interesting roguelikes that are not overly complicated, but very like curious systems that are kind of deep.
All right, I'll have to add that to my list then. That never-ending wish list on Steam of games to keep an eye out for.
Yeah.
I guess talking about games with like interesting stories or being different from one another, I gotta ask, for both of you, have you had a chance to play Getting Over It, or even have any thoughts on that crazy game?
That's the kind of game that I would never play. It's like it's really, I mean, it seems really neat, but it doesn't.
Oh, I think you cut out for a second. Yeah. Is there like writing in that game? I've mostly just seen the basic kind of, climbing.
Not really. The developer does like do narration, but
is there a what?
Okay, there's some narration.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. What were you asking about? Is there a narrative in the game?
Yeah, I was asking if there's like writing, like a textual narrative.
Oh yeah, I think there is something about like trying. I
think it's a developer just messing with you for however long it takes you to beat that game, if you ever beat it, I should say.
Yeah.
Like for me, I kind of have like, I guess I like games like Dark Souls, but at the same time, in some ways, certain games that are like about getting really good at something, I don't really have an interest in. Dark Souls, I push through it because I like exploring, but like Getting Over It, which is purely just like the mastering this thing, I don't know, I don't have any interest at all.
Yeah, similar yeah, I feel similarly where if like difficulty and kind of like mastering this like physical sort of Twitch controller like kind of control based thing is it usually just frustrates me, and it can be used like as a part of a greater kind of like design goal, or kind of it can serve a narrative function, but I don't if there's not enough narrative function outside of the difficulty itself, then I'm like, oh no, I don't know, not that interested. And I'm also not that interested as like a creator in creating stuff that's like really focused on like, oh, like can you beat this, like you have to like get a lot better or whatever to like beat this. And I think our games kind of tend to shy away from that and just try to focus on like, well, it's like interesting to do this thing, whether or not it's hard, hopefully, you know.
Yeah. So I'm going to assume then that none of you are fans of like bullet hell games or Kaizo games as well.
No, I can't stand any. I mean, actually, it's funny because I actually played through Undertale last week, and that's fine. That amount of bullet hell I can handle. But I think beyond that, I have absolutely no interest.
Yeah, I have played some. Like I think growing up, I played like a Super Nintendo. I think it was some Raiden series game. And like I don't know, I've had fun with them, but I don't really seek them out. I played Jamestown in college.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so they can be fun. Imperishable Memories is a narratively and visually interesting one that came out recently, and I enjoyed that.
And it's actually very interesting to hear somebody else who's played Jamestown, because I actually met the developers. It was like right before I started Game Wiz. I think they're Philadelphia or Pennsylvania based. And sadly, they're not really in business anymore after that game.
Oh
no.
Yeah, that's a bummer. It was fun. I liked it.
I want to go back to something that you two were just talking about regarding not really doing like high challenge in your games. I think, or trying to get that balance right, because I think that's a very interesting topic in of itself. And it can sometimes be, I guess, no pun intended, hard to get that right. Because there are people who, like, going back to the roguelike genre, who expect a very hardcore experience. You know, you should be, you know, beaten and bruised by the end of that game, or it's not worth playing. But then there's always that idea of trying to make something that's more appealing without kind of, I guess, getting rid of what makes it unique or what makes it different. And I was looking up your other game, the 2016 Even the Ocean, and it looks like from the screenshot and descriptions that, again, you two are trying again going for that balance of telling a very unique or different story while still making it accessible enough so that, you know, a wide margin of people can play it.
Yeah, we did some pretty interesting things with Even the Ocean as far as like difficulty settings, and there's like it's like pretty highly customizable in terms of the kind of platforming challenges. One thing you can do is to like play the entire game in story mode, which like takes out the whole kind of like dungeony parts. But if you like want to play those parts, but it's like physically difficult, there's these like helper blocks that we added to make the platforming easier. And then there's a bunch of other stuff where you can like change how much like damage you take from stuff, or you can even like just like float around instead of having to do the jumping and platforming.
Just a lot of customization.
Yeah, there's like a shocking amount of customization, and I don't know if it's
Maybe
used
too
much, but it was kind of just like, I guess we were just sort of like exploring ideas related to making things accessible.
Yeah, it was interesting to do. I think we definitely went overboard on the various customization features, but it was kind of cool to try. Like the game already is pretty easy, I guess, from a platforming game standpoint. Not easy enough that I think everyone would breeze through it, but like, yeah, I don't know. I like the float mode because then people don't have to deal with the jumping, which could be a barrier. But various other things, yeah, I don't know. It's just interesting that it's there. Even the ocean is kind of interesting that it exists, I guess.
There's a lot of things. I mean, I think it. I like the idea that it's there and that maybe it could inspire someone playing it to think about maybe a game that they're making and be like, oh, like, what are some like weird things that, you know, aren't necessarily the first idea of how to make like a difficulty or accessibility setting that might work for my particular game. It wouldn't necessarily be the same thing, but I think it's like opens an interesting mode of thought, hopefully.
Yeah. And it's certainly a discussion we're seeing more and more of these last few years, with developers trying to have not only just like accessibility options in terms of like for like handicap or disability, such as colorblind, subtitles, etc., but also having gameplay or game affecting elements, like you said, like being able to remove, any kind of difficult sections if somebody's not able to handle that. And even I think last year's big hit Celeste is probably the most recent example, with the fact that you could play that game just straight through and it is a brutally difficult platformer, or you can tweak it however many ways you want, even to the point where you can have infinite jumping, infinite lives, and nothing can ever hurt you, essentially.
Yeah.
It makes me want to bring up Luca. Have you heard of Luca, Born of a Dream?
Not off the top of my head.
It's an action game that came out last August, I think. And it's interesting because the game is spoilers, I guess, but we're talking about design, so sorry, Colin, if you're watching. It's built around 2 playthroughs. In the first playthrough, so it's an action game. It's kind of like Platinum game style in that it's built of sequences of encounters. But there's a very interesting visual aesthetic, very interesting narrative kind of going over it. And during your first playthrough, you can customize, difficulty options like how hard the enemies hit, various like customizable things to make things easier. But it's interesting because the game's story is kind of built around you, I guess, getting better as you play. So the second playthrough introduces a really interesting mechanic where you have to play really well in each of the battles to progress, but you can actually redo the levels to try to get better, I guess, ratings and stuff. So it kind of has this way of easing people in a very like customizable way that kind of sets everybody up to be able to take on the challenge of like the second cycle. And I think that was one of the most interesting difficulty things that I've seen done so far. And I'll link that game unless
I linked it. It's not super clear, but yeah, Luca's cool. You bringing up Celeste reminded me. I had this thought because I played Celeste recently, and have you heard of the game Wandersong?
I've heard of it. I don't think I played it. Let me see.
Yeah, it's like you kind of like a light story platformer, and you solve puzzles by like singing different notes. And when I played those games, and I also like replayed our game, Even the Ocean, recently, in my mind they kind of like formed a sort of interesting like design triptych of 3 games that felt sort of like thematically and design wise, coming from a similar place, I guess. And part of that was definitely had to do with going into the like genre of like platformers, which is often like a very reflex focused and like difficult kind of genre, but like trying to think about like, so like a lot of people do like this, but like what if someone like likes certain aspects of it but isn't able to like perform the whatever like button presses in the right timing, or that maybe that's not what interests them about playing through this game. And so all three of these games I feel like have a similar but like unique kind of take on approaching platformers, which I think for all the developers were like kind of very sort of integral to their experience of playing games, like growing up and stuff like that, and their interests, but then like trying to translate that into something that's maybe more accessible. Yeah, so I think those three games are very interesting to think about in relation to each other. And I was also noticing that they all came from developers who were sort of around the early game maker scene, which had a lot of very like, I don't know, very gamey games. Like platformers strike me as very gamey games because they're just this very particular kind of abstraction that's so unrelated to kind of other sort of forms of media.
Yeah, but I'm actually basing my second book I'm writing right now on the platformer genre, and talking more about how it is like that weird, kind of its own weird niche in terms of the rest of the game industry these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, like with having those accessibility options, it has become a very interesting case of developers trying to strike that balance, and my voice is cutting in and out. Trying to strike that balance between keeping like a game being unique or challenging, but still opening things up to, again, people who may like the genre, but again may not have, high level, like Kaizo level skills, or even going back to the bullet hell genre, trying to play one of those games. Oscar mentioned Tuhu, which I know is just an insane bullet hell franchise, and it's sometimes very hard to find like the stepping stone into these genres. And Oscar asked a question earlier. I think this will be a good time to pose it. How do you plan or design in terms of difficulty? Do you start from hard and add settings to lowered? Do you start at like the easy and then boost things up, or do you even just start from like a middle or a standard experience?
I don't think. I feel like it's pretty hard to shoot for like something like the concept of like hard, medium, or easy, just because people are like so different, and even just like in terms of our games, like in terms of Anodyne, many of people have called it like very easy, and other people have called it very hard, and it's just like there's really no, you can't just kind of decide, oh, this is medium or whatever. So I think it probably, what I would say is that it starts out as trying to, I think the way that I mostly think about it is trying to make something that is just like slightly easy for me. If it's something action based, then I try to make it a little easy for me, because as a developer I'll be like playing with it so much that I'll like kind of become like the equivalent of a very skilled player, and so I think that's what I would shoot for as like a baseline.
Yeah, I think that's right too. Like, I feel like when you're designing like an action or combat platforming situation, it's all very nebulous, but it's pretty easy to tell when something has gotten to the point of like, Toho, Bullet Hell, or like Kaizo Mario levels. And as long as you avoid that, and if it's playable yourself, and I know that myself, I'm not too skilled of an action. As far as like skill levels go, I'm not like a pro or anything. So if I can finish something, then that means it's a reasonable difficulty. And I think what I found, what's important after doing even the Ocean Anodyne 1 is that Anodyne 2 has one difficulty option right now, and it's just to double your health, your maximum health. And so how come I'm kind of going into it for Anodyne 2 is that, if it's pretty reasonable to finish on like one health bar, then I think doubling that maximum health will be enough of a buffer to kind of create enough of a space for people who are not as familiar with the genre, without having to, make the action design so sparse that it's not as interesting. Because I think, at least in Zelda-like games, the action and the room-to-room experience is kind of to build a certain kind of like texture to take you between the various like narrative points, or to kind of flesh out the feeling of an area. So yeah, but I guess I don't know. It is a lot of relative, but definitely starting it. I guess you kind of get an intuition for what's like an interesting combination of the various enemies or mechanics you're making. And then if you hit that interest level and it's not like impossible, then it's probably fine.
Yeah, I think it definitely has more to do with creating a sort of idea, and hopefully that's an interesting idea, and then kind of seeing if it's hard, or seeing how hard it is, and like adjusting it based on that. And yeah, rather than targeting a specific kind of difficulty level for us.
Yeah. One more quick thing is that it also helps to have a game. It also helps for the health to kind of be refillable, I guess. So in Anodyne 2, you played through it, right? So like, you can get hurt and get down to 1 health, but you can always like backtrack a bit and grind to like get to refill your health. The only way you really die in Anodyne 2 is when you either like maybe during a boss, or if you're kind of just constantly brute force throwing yourself at a room.
Okay. And yeah, with like Anodyne, with a lot of games we've seen in terms of, again, that kind of balance of difficulty. I guess a question for both of you then. When you typically play video games, like if there is like easy, medium, hard, that kind of thing, what difficulty levels do you normally like gravitate towards if you're given that opportunity?
I usually just do medium, and then occasionally I guess I'll switch it if I feel like it's too hard or too easy. But usually just go for medium.
Yeah, I'll start on like the recommended difficulty, and then the instant I get frustrated, I'll just turn it down to easy.
I guess I'm the odd man out for today's cast, and I just on hard all the way, and then I will just try my damnedest to beat it. As anybody who watched me when I played God of War on the hardest difficulty earlier in 2018.
Yeah, I don't think I'd ever do that.
I don't think I should have done that either. I think that probably raised my blood pressure up a few points by the end of that one.
Yeah. Yeah, but difficulty is interesting. I feel like so much of it is also like it's so psychological that a lot of the time the way the game presents itself has like a big impact on the perceived difficulty. Like if it's like seems scarier, then it seems harder, sort of.
Yeah, I guess like
oh yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one thing that always annoys me is when games go for like the very weird, like difficulty settings, like like easy's normal, normal's hard, hard is impossible, impossible is just forget about it kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little bit of posturing, I guess.
And I
Yeah,
guess
one thing I find one thing I find fascinating is a lot of the time when I'll be trying to fight some boss in a game or whatever, and I'll be like doing the right thing, but I'll sort of like expect it to be doing more damage, or it'll just seem kind of hard and I'll be losing a lot. And then I'll watch a video and be like, "Oh, am I doing this right?" And then like once I see someone do it, then like I instantly just win. And I'm like, "Oh, I guess like it's just not that hard." But even though I was doing the same strategy, it's like once you have a certain confidence, it changes how you play. And so like stuff like that is very strange and interesting to me.
Now I know earlier Sean mentioned that he played like the Dark Souls games. Have you played any of them, Marina?
Yeah, I've played 1 and 2, and I think I started 3, but I didn't finish it. I think I was playing 3, and then I got to some like underground regenerating skeletons place, and I was like, I'm just tired of this. I already played 2 of these games. I don't want to go through another underground regenerating skeleton place.
Yeah, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I heard my
I think he cut out again.
Oh, okay.
Okay, there you are.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay. I need to buy a new laptop. Something's wrong with the USB on the power for the computer. Anyways,
I go very back and forth about Dark Souls. Like, is this worth it? I don't know. And then like sometimes it seems easy. There's a lot of weird subtle things where depending on like what build you have, a certain part might be like really hard all of a sudden. But then like other times you'll be like, oh, like these games aren't that bad. I don't know. It goes all over the place in my mind.
I played. I don't really like the games for their combat, but I think the combat gives the games this interesting kind of like texture of going through them. Like I played Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, and the DLCs and Bloodborne, and I don't really like the combat, but I like that the combat makes you focus a lot on the environment. So I've actually done a lot of like environment studies of the game's level design. Like I had during even the Ocean development, I had like a video series called like Walk Souls, where I would clear out all the enemies in an area and then just record myself describing and just kind of talking about how the various spaces and the 3D environments kind of like feel. And I mean, can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I'll post a link to one of those. But so I like the games because they have this kind of very walking pace to them, actually, and you kind of build a really interesting mental map of the entire world in your head, and it makes all of the level design and layout very memorable. So it was nice for like building a vocabulary for 3D. Like a lot of games, I can't really remember that much about how they're laid out, but
yeah.
Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, I could probably like draw out the level designs of all the areas.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago regarding like platformer and 2D design, that's always been like one of like, the weird differences between the two. Like as you were just saying, Sean, like with like 3D games, especially with the Soul series, you really do get that sense of place. You get that sense that it's an environment rather than just a bunch of assets somebody just like put together in 20 minutes.
Yeah, because it really matters like where you're standing at what time and stuff like that. And I think I like playing Dark Souls when it's sort of like meditatively sort of carving out an understanding of the area and kind of like getting a little farther and pushing a little further, and then certain like builds or certain parts of the game kind of encourage you to like I don't know, try to like run wildly around past certain things, or you keep dying like really suddenly at certain points, and those are the times where it starts to lose me. But when it's just kind of like carving out an understanding of this interesting little space, then I'm like pretty into it.
Yeah. The worst level designs are probably like when, well, I don't know if there's any bad like level layouts. Just the enemy design and placement is what usually ruins areas in Dark Souls, because, like Marina said, when you're just sprinting past shit, like the Dark Souls DLC, there's a lot of that. It's like you're kind of missing what makes the game interesting, in my opinion. If anyone's played the Snow DLC for Dark Souls 2, that's really bad. Yeah.
Oh man, I feel the headache coming back as you just said that, Sean.
Wait, Marina, did you play that?
I didn't play that.
Okay,
No.
it's
Lucky
really,
you.
I'm I'm not super into DLC. I kind of feel a sense of relief when I finish a game, and I'm like, I don't want to like get that sense of relief.
like
the new people watching this right now, I don't think they saw the Dark Souls ones I did on the channel, but yeah, 2 was a pain, and I finally just got to the point where like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, why am I just beating myself up for the last hour or two? I can turn this off. I can go do something else.
Exactly. I didn't finish. Yeah. It's too hard. Even with the magic build, it's like ridiculous.
And yet, like with that kind of environmental storytelling, and actually before I bring that, I want to do a quick time check. We are just about at 50 minutes in terms of the stream, and I still want to get to talking about Anodyne 2. I guess, are both of you okay going for like another 15-20 minutes, or is like an hour or a little bit more than that kind of like a stop point for both of you?
Like 15 or 20 minutes is good. We can definitely shift over to Anodyne 2 right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. In that case, I have one like general game design question for both of you, and then we'll focus on Anodyne 2 for the rest of the stream.
Okay.
And this is what we were talking about just before we started the stream itself. I want to get both of your thoughts on this, and that's regarding kind of the challenges of focusing on a scale or development when it comes to game design. Now, again, for both of you, you've been making games together since I think Anodyne came out in 2013. You worked on it for about a year before that, so about 7 years. And one of the things that we've seen, I have a few people, some of my writers, one who's not on right now, who's actually, I think, in college studying game design as well. And it's very hard, again, for a lot of these design topics to really find credible or informative discussions on it. So I want to get both of your thoughts on that challenge of, I guess, working on a project and, managing the scale or just managing the development of a game. Especially when we start talking about things that start going into like months or even years of development.
Yeah.
Can you still hear me? Sorry, let me think.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I think the best thing is to use a well-documented and tested engine. I think we've always been pretty good at finishing things, but even the Ocean took us 3.5 years, and that was, when you think about it, so it's easy to think about it as like we didn't have enough pressure, but the more I think about it, it was just we didn't have the right tools. We used Hexflixel and we didn't have a level editor, so I built the level editor. We had to build all this other like crap too to get the game working, and just the engine was, anyways. If you're gonna try to make a game that's like 4 or 5 hours, like you need to use something like Unity or like Game Maker, something that has existing tools for editing levels and stuff, because there's so much stuff you're gonna have to be building otherwise. I mean, no matter what, there's so much stuff you're gonna have to be adding that if in between music and between writing and between programming level design, you're also having to stop and take 2 or 3 days to implement like slopes collisions like we had to for even the Ocean, you're just going to be like context switching so much. And then there's a point where if your tools are so inefficient and the game's kind of big that too much time is going to pass between making progress on level designs, and that's going to lead to like possibility for revisions. And that's kind of also what really will kill the development time. But there's also more to that too. Like, there's also just the issue of taking on too big of a project. It won't even matter what tools you use. The game's just way too big. Like, I know, like, there's people who will be making a game and they'll do it by themselves, but it's a 10-hour game. It has very complicated aspects to it, and it'll take them a very long time to make it. And there's kind of and I've kind of always had this whole like development philosophy of kind of like lo-fi that I've been trying to like talk about and write about a bit, which is to kind of look for ways to take shortcuts or cut down on the features of not cut down on the features, but really like find what matters in a game's design and use stylized art in ways that don't require traditional like heavy pipelines of like normal map, bump map, baked lighting, texturing, or like crazy texturing and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm glad you just mentioned that, Sean, because art has definitely been, I think, one of these sticking points for a lot of new developers. Because, as I'm sure both of you are aware, it takes a lot of time and energy to come up with evocative or unique art or aesthetics for a game. And it's one of those areas that for a lot of consumers, like, it becomes like almost like the immediate judging point for a game. That if they look at a game and the art doesn't immediately pop out to them, they're not even going to bother anything else with it. But, of course, the downside is, for many developers, they're obviously not going to be full-time artists, so they don't have the money to hire like a professional or high-quality artist. And it gets very tricky, I think, as you said, Sean, to try and, do everything. Like, can I make this game and make it a 10-hour game, at the same time create my own engine, and at the same time create my own art? Most people aren't going to be able to do all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anyone can. Like, even if you look at All Our Ages, I hired Marina and some others to do a few pieces of art for that. But even then, there was so much stuff that I like cut corners on with that game to get to the 2-hour, 90-minute play length. But yeah, like, as far as starting artists go, I almost feel like you have to just try to look at a lot of references and just try to like learn a little bit of pixel art and 3D modeling, like enough that you can kind of, it might technically look like shit. So like if I made pixel art tile set right now, it wouldn't look, and you could tell it's done by an amateur, but it would still have a style to it. I think that technical skill and having an eye for art direction, an eye for art style they're related, but they're definitely separate in certain ways. And I think that, while ultimately, if you're trying to get your game if you're trying to be commercial and, get games, you need to work with someone who has experience and like has technical skill, but like you can still kind of like start out just by practicing on your own a bit. Like I think a good example is like no, maybe not. Yeah, I don't know, but like,
are you worried about insulting someone?
Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think, I guess from my perspective, as someone with maybe more sort of traditional sort of like drawing and painting kind of art experience, and I guess some like hobbyist pixel art experience, but not a lot of kind of traditional game production pipeline experience. I think the way that our games tend to work out is by kind of focusing on the art direction and kind of the ideas behind what we want to depict, so that hopefully it's something kind of unique and relying on that kind of the strength of sort of the vision or the uniqueness to catch people's eye, rather than kind of the sheer sort of kind of like complicatedness or fanciness
like
in
that
various different
raw
ways.
graphical power, like something like Unreal Engine level, that kind of thing.
Yeah, or even if it's kind of like something simpler, a lot of games will have a really high amount of detail. Even if it's kind of a lower fi style, there'll be like, a room and it'll have tons of different kinds of objects in it. And we tend to just not really do that. And that just saves a lot of time.
Yeah, animations or unique art assets is what will kill some projects.
But yeah, I think focusing on art direction, meaning kind of like, I think it's definitely really helpful to take in a lot of like visual influences or notice. Sean will like send screen caps from movies and stuff, or notice interesting sort of color palettes and compositions that just like evoke certain moods to us or feel special in some way, and trying to highlight matching like a color palette to a mood or different stuff like that can really make up for a lot of otherwise like simplicity.
Like it helps to, like going along, I think it helps to just start, like most people have a smartphone nowadays, so if you're doing games and you're involved in the art in any way, like, whether it be like direction or making it, it's like I think this is more important if you don't have like art skills like me, is just to get good at, just take lots of photographs. You don't have to share them with anyone, but just to kind of get good at thinking about imagery and stuff like that, and have a reference to pull from when you need to. Yeah.
Alright. And again, this is a topic we could easily spend like the next hour or so on. Like, we're not going to be solving all this in 10 to 15 minutes. But to wrap up this part, and then we'll go to Anodyne 2, I guess for both of you, is there like a major red flag when it comes to planning a game's development or scope out that you've either ran into or you've seen other developers have done that could be of like some education for people watching us right now?
I mean, it's definitely, I feel like it's been kind of like advised to death, the fact that people tend to kind of scope too big for their early game projects or whatever. It's definitely true, but I think something that we've run into that's always kind of interesting is that for both Anodyne and Anodyne 2, we set out to make something smaller than what it eventually ended up as. And I think that's just like an extremely natural part of the process, where if you'll have an idea, and then once you try to like bring that idea from an idea into reality and actually the player doing specific things, you'll inherently have ideas that like sprout off of that in all this like network of kind of tree branches, and you'll be able to like go in a lot of different directions, and you'll want to bring some of those directions back into your initial idea, and that's like a good thing. But it's just something to just like inherently expect, is that you'll have more ideas as time goes on, and so you can kind of just trick yourself basically and be like, oh, I'm gonna make like a 2 or 3 hour game, and that's kind of what we were doing when we started Anodyne 2.
You said 1 or 2.
Yeah, it'll be like a movie.
I was reading the email. It's like Act 1, 20 minutes.
Yeah, that was
30 minutes.
I'm gonna be honest, I don't even think I believed that at the time, but it's good to go with it, because you're just like, then what you end up with after like your initial ideas have better ideas that kind of sprout off of them is like something that's ultimately longer than the short thing that you were going to do, but a manageable scope.
No.
Yep,
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, not. I think it's good to not, if you're starting out, just don't get focused on like trying to do one feature for a week or something. I don't know. It's better to work fast and sloppy.
All right, but I think with that, as we just went over the hour mark, let us spend the remaining part of our cast talking more about Anodyne 2, and then we will wrap things up. For the people watching us live right now, if you have any questions for Sean or Marina regarding Anodyne or Anodyne 2's development, please get them in now, as we'll probably spend maybe like the next, or like 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll wrap things up around that point. But with that said, though, let's focus a little bit more on Anodyne 2 and talk a little bit about the design and what's coming. So, for people listening to us right now, live or recorded, who haven't heard of the game, what is kind of like the general, I guess, the elevator pitch for it?
So, Anodyne 2 is a game where you explore a surreal world in 3D, and you meet these strange characters, and you shrink down inside of their bodies, which end up being these like 2D Zelda-like dungeons. That's our elevator pitch. But the more detailed version of that is that you're playing as this character named Nova. She works under this kind of like mysterious entity called the Center, who instructs. Well, her job is to be a nano cleaner who goes around and cleans people of this like infestation of nanodust, which is kind of growing in the world just due to like entropy. And so this being the Center is trying to control that. And so the game flow is kind of like, you go around the city or whatever, or around like outdoor mountains, and you run into these people like standing around, and they ask you for help with cleaning. And then inside of them, there's kind of like a little like themed mini dungeon, maybe a boss or something. And by cleaning the characters out and getting their dust and other stuff, you can kind of expand how far you can go in the world. And there's a nice story that's character driven that kind of leads you through all of that. And you can become a card whenever you want.
And I was just about to bring that up, and one of the things that we saw when we did the play of Anodyne 2, for people watching this live, would be about this past week. For recorded folks, probably be a little bit longer than that. But the game features different styles and different genres. You have 3D platforming, the 2D kind of Zelda gameplay, driving the car, and there's even like a little rhythm, dance kind of minigame where you're trying to enter the person's body. Yeah. And a few questions did come up in chat earlier about this. I want to bring them up now. So the first one was, what was the decision to kind of mix these various genres together with Anodyne 2?
I think, well, the whole process was kind of circuitous, and I guess the story and the kind of gameplay genre ideas kind of like went back and forth between one influencing the other. But ultimately what it comes down to, and this is kind of like a segue from the earlier topic, was that there are certain things that we were just like experienced in or confident in, or that we felt that would lend themselves to one part of the game that we like needed to fulfill. And so like for the 2D levels, the level design to create kind of like some simple but interesting little like puzzles where you're going around doing some action-based fun little puzzling stuff. For us to figure out how to do that satisfyingly in 3D would have been really complicated, and learning a whole lot of new like skills that we hadn't really done before. And so the moment we decided to switch those to 2D, it suddenly became like very easy, kind of relatively speaking, and it just felt very comfortable, like to just have those tiny little simple grid-based ideas And as far as the like outside parts being 3D, that has felt in its own way kind of easy, even though 3D is like relatively new to us and very new to me. Compared to when we were working on our previous game, Even the Ocean, and trying to create a similar feeling of kind of exploring a landscape, but in a 2D platforming context, that actually was really difficult because it's just like flat, and so your exploration is kind of limited unless you do kind of more complicated stuff between sort of going left and going right. And visually it was also kind of complicated and required a lot of unique art assets. And so for 3D, suddenly that sort of hiking exploration-y feel just lent itself very well to 3D. And you can, you just naturally move in any direction and naturally have different views of the art assets as you move to different compositions by moving the character. And so a lot of our like efficiency in working on Anodyne 2, and I think it's been like a pretty efficient and fast development overall, is really just making the things that work naturally one way and then the other things another way. And we're kind of able to do that by creating this sort of surreal world that just fits around whatever we want to do.
Yeah, I think that pretty much explains it well. And the nice thing is about all of that is that by kind of putting things in design things in categories that they're better suited for it, it frees up some time to make some nice like polishes. Like if we were doing like, the game has some cutscenes and various things that are very one-off, and cutscenes and one-off things are kind of like there's something that can be a stumbling block, I think, for production because they're very expensive in terms of art time, coding time, design time, but they take up a small part of the game. But at the same time, they're really nice because these things can really like drive home certain story themes or like certain moments of the game, and so they're important in that sense. And I think that by sort of like categorizing things into 2D and 3D, like Marina was describing, it helps free up time for some of those important things, even though they're relatively like I guess short. It kind of gives us time to spread the polish into areas that need it. Like for example, shrinking into characters in 3D to 2D, that was like pretty heavy in terms of polish. But by doing all that polish there, it really like gives a nice like weight to that action. Even though, if you look at it very formally, all you're doing is just going from one map to another map, right? That kind of thing. Sorry, I have trouble sitting still, and my back hurts.
I know the feeling. People, I like move around as well while I'm doing these things.
Yeah.
A question.
I generally just can't sit still.
A question popped up. Fernand asked, "Did releasing the first game on the Pirate Bay help with the sales? And was there any regret in doing that in the long term?"
I don't know about helping with sales. What it functioned as was marketing for the game. It basically functioned as a piece of news that could be written about, and that did get us attention on Reddit, which I was able to funnel towards the Greenlight page. So it kind of functioned as a marketing campaign of sorts towards the Greenlight page. So in that sense, it helped the sales. I don't really know whether we would have lost. I mean, if you just consider the Pirate Bay sale on its own, I don't know. By the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, we put Anodyne on the Pirate Bay for free to people to download if they can't afford it. And we got some people writing about the game because of that. I don't know if we lost money or gained money from that, but it did lead to the game doing pretty well on Steam, so I would say it was good overall. I don't know if something like that could get written about nowadays since it's happened before, but it's still a nice gesture to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And getting back to Anodyne 2, with the various genres, as you were just saying, Sean, with regards to that transition from 2D and 3D and vice versa, I was just like kind of curious. Again, I'm not a programmer by trade, but like, was there any like interesting or like a unique challenge about making the game kind of transition between those two modes?
Um, I guess, well, going between the modes is not, there's nothing very, like, really difficult about that because of how Unity is set up. They're just in, like, different levels, basically, of different things you control. Maybe the one technical challenge was, I guess, figuring out what UI to do. I don't know, but even that wasn't that, it was just, UI is kind of always annoying, but I guess the tricky thing about 2D and 3D was deciding what the pause menu should look like, maybe. Actually, on the level of implementing stuff involved, it's pretty straightforward. The hardest thing has probably been making a camera in 3D. That was probably the worst. Or like controls. I mean, as you may have seen, the car controls are not perfect, and I don't really think they will be fixed further because they're pretty good for what you use them most of the time. But if you start trying to drive it in like a small alley or like off a cliff, it's like maybe something weird will happen.
I think when I was playing, I may have gotten like stuck on a tree. Like I hit like a whole ramp, and I kind of like flew in the air, and I got like stuck like right in a tree for a second.
Part of the narrative, Nova's newly born. She can't drive, so she doesn't have a license.
That's even more confusing when you're the car itself.
Yeah,
she's disoriented. Yeah.
Now, one thing that I wanted to bring up, I want to get both your thoughts on this. With regards to Anodyne 2, again, from a design perspective, you are switching between these various genres or these various game systems. And we were talking about this during the stream that in the past, we've seen developers kind of run into trouble when it comes to these kinds of multi-systems in a single game. And the challenge, of course, is that if person likes system A and B, but don't like system C, they're still forced to do that. And I just want to get both of your takes on that kind of challenge when it comes to making sure that each system feels right and that it feels like part of like a cohesive whole, rather than just saying, here's the shooting aspect, they're going to go here and do detective work, and now down here's the platformer.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Well, I'm not sure kind of what games that you and your viewers were necessarily thinking about or talking about in comparison. But I think for Anodyne 2, in a lot of ways, it's just the way that we're designing it is like as though it's Anodyne 1, but the parts between the dungeons are just a 3D game instead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I feel like the progression feels pretty natural. And they're not really they're just kind of inextricable from each other in that you just kind of like narratively it just feels like, oh yeah, like I just have to go to some other person now. and I think gameplay wise basing it on the basically like the Zelda overworld structure but in 3D makes it kind of work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with the design of the game, like going with the various people and the little dungeon themselves, as we were talking about earlier in the cast, with the kind of trying to balance like the various difficulties of the game, with Anodyne 2, for people watching us, in terms of, I guess, overall difficulty, are you aiming this to be more of a casual play, something more like Even the Oceans, or something else?
It's a little. It could be both. I mean, it's around the difficulty of Anodyne 1, but it's more accessible because there's an option to kind of double your health. So I think it's probably a little harder than Even the Ocean, but Even the Ocean and Anodyne are kind of hard in different ways because they're different types of coordination. But I guess from a general, if we're taking the general gamer who plays on general console gamer who grew up on console games, then it's probably Anodyne 2 is a little more difficult. Because
I think it's probably just sort of medium. I mean, I think it's basically
Medium well.
if you've played Anodyne 1 or if you've played Zelda or like the Game Boy Zelda games, then I think it'll be probably you'll find it kind of just medium.
Yeah.
We're definitely like a lot of the kind of puzzles are there's not going to be a huge focus on like any dungeons feeling kind of maze-like and getting kind of worn down by enemies a lot over time. It's mostly just trying to design-wise, the ideas are just supposed to be like trying to like interesting uses of the entities that we create that maybe try to communicate something story-wise as well. But yeah.
And it was brought up in chat a few minutes ago. Like, where did the name Anodyne come from for the series?
I think it means a few different things.
Well,
really
the inspiration, the place that I first heard that word and like thought about the word, or I think I like looked it up at some point, was there's a song by the band Tarkio, which is the front man of the Decemberists, Colin Malloy, his like college band, and they use the word anodyne in a song, and so that's when I learned about it. And then when we were brainstorming, I think it just kind of like fit the themes of the game and also felt sort of iconic because it's a word that like people are like, oh yeah, that's a word, like, but also like it's not a common word, particularly, and so yeah, it just kind of worked out. There's definitely ways to read into it in terms of the themes of the game that I think make a lot of sense, and we actually dig into that a little more in Anodyne 2, but we won't go into that too much.
And let's see. I guess with the general gameplay, as you said, with the kind of structure, and this is one of the things I found very interesting about Anodyne 2, and what we see from a lot of other like independent games, is how you develop this kind of, I'm not sure if I want to say structure or like a routine with how the game is played. You know, you explore 3D, you find the person, you talk to them, and then you enter their body, you solve the issue, you move on to the next. And like trying to get that kind of core gameplay loop, like it sounds very simple when you say it, but it obviously takes a lot more work to make sure you get everything working. And I think, as you said a few minutes ago, Sean, with regards to like trying to make it feel like, or you may have said this as well, Marina, about trying to make sure each element feels like it's part of this experience. That's not just, again, you just doing something because the developer says, now go over here and jump up and down 55 times in a row.
Yeah. I think, yeah, after playing through that demo, I think you start to obviously feel that pattern of walking around and shrinking down, so we had to come up with ways to kind of sort of shake that up a bit as the game goes on. So as the game goes on, that pattern of going into body, I mean, it still recurs, but it's, it starts to be slightly different. But yeah, I think so. Like, if the game is too smooth and too quick, like if you just like go from 3D to 2D, then there's not really a good sense of like world there, I guess you could say, and things don't feel as narratively heavy. Like certain things aren't sold in the right way that they should be. So I think stuff like the little like tunnel animation, I think those are really important as well. You're kind of making it feel like there's a boundary between this like 2D and 3D realm, rather than just like, oh, it's another level and you just go there right away. Like if you think about Spyro the Dragon, I actually replayed the HD remaster last year. I had opinions about Spyro, but I think one thing I liked from the original was that you do have that kind of like flying scene when you go into a level, and like you go into the portal, the skybox changes, and eventually you like land in the level in like a seamless way. It kind of has that. It gives a sense that you're like going to a different place.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's very core to game design. Ultimately, the idea of patterns and kind of because in games where there's sorts of kind of like challenges, or even if you just need to like find where to go, sort of, there's it requires certain amounts of predictability so that the player can like make educated guesses, and then hopefully also enough of little bits of surprises maybe, or mixing up the formula so that the things don't get too predictable.
Yeah.
All right. And I know we are starting to run a little bit late, so a few final questions and then we'll wrap it up. One thing I wanted to touch on that you were talking about earlier, Sean, with regards to this kind of lo-fi style that you wanted to try and cultivate. With Anodyne 2, I think you may have kind of answered this in passing a few minutes ago. Was the decision there from the get-go to have this kind of lo-fi 3D aesthetic for the game, or did that develop over the course of development?
That was from the start, because we first, I don't remember.
I mean, we literally couldn't do high fidelity 3D. I like kind of just learned how to do 3D, and I'm the main artist, so it was always a matter of tying stylistic kind of intentionality to what is feasible and what makes sense for where like what our skill sets are and what our experiences have been so far.
Yeah, and I knew that lo-fi is a workable like visual aesthetic, because ultimately, if you have a talented artist who can good eye for textures and like texture density and like composition, it really doesn't matter how hi-fi the art is. You can kind of make people think it kind of just looks good no matter what. And I kind of learned that because I did all the level design and art for all their ages, and it uses maybe like not that many textures, less than like 50 or 100, and people still had it look pretty good, even though I don't have many 3D modeling skills. So that kind of convinced me that now if we pick this kind of lo-fi style and have an actual artist working on the models and textures, then it should be fine. And then also there's kind of like a thing recurring now, a small like nostalgia for PS1 and N64. That's something that also works to our favor, is that people are more interested in these styles now. I'm interested in this style because of practicality, style reasons, a little bit of nostalgia myself as well.
And it's also just, I mean, it's anything lo-fi has that's like it's meaningful kind of in a whole host of ways, in terms of the way that things can feel sort of more jagged in a sense, or more like scrappy kind of, and that that has like a narrative effect on like how you like perceive it and how you like perceive the game as a whole, and it fits really well, I think, a lot of the time with the types of stories that we do and the types of themes that we do, of being a little kind of real side, and it just all kind of like fits into itself, I think, to be lo-fi.
And I think, like, as to you were talking about, that when we look at games, like, if you can give it that, like, that, I guess, quote-unquote, unique look to it. Again, it doesn't have to be super detailed. Even, like, 8-bit pixel graphics, and have something that stands out to them, it can pull people in terms of being able to kind of just understand what's going on, or being able to see that. There's a game release, I want to say last month, that was like done like this old, oh no, I don't remember the name, the styles. Like, we're talking, I think, like almost like a Atari or like Turbo Graphics level of or Intellivision level graphics. And again, nothing looks highly detailed, but it looks very stylized. And we were talking about this on stream many times with art versus aesthetics. Like, when aesthetics stand out, it makes the game stand out as a whole as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, ultimately the art, ultimately, like, the visuals in the game are part of a whole and are ideally serving some kind of purpose, and are not just like you can't just think about any given art asset and be like, what's the best version of this, like, and just make it really fancy or something, because that's not really the point of it, you know.
All right. Before we answer these final questions and go into our kind of wrap up, are there any aspects of Anodyne 2 from a design or development standpoint that we didn't touch on that either of you like to discuss now?
I think we're pretty good. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess, yeah. I guess there's a few, but I don't think we really have time for like, like.
Again, these casts can go like 2 to 3 hours if we're not careful. The people watching, they don't mind. They love it when we run long.
Oh yeah. Just like, yeah.
Sean has to walk around.
Yeah,
but yeah,
I have to go to the bathroom, but it's like, but not just that, but like, you know.
Anyway, yeah, I guess I would say, I'm not gonna like say a lot about it, but I'm really excited about the story and the writing of Anodyne 2, and I think it does a lot of unique stuff, and that kind of, if you've played the preview build, both in terms of the gameplay like we started to mention, but also in terms of the story, that things really kind of unfold as you get farther into the game in really interesting ways. So I guess that's just something maybe to look forward to.
All right. So we have a few questions from chat, and then we'll wrap it up. So this first one, Ferdinand asks, do you plan to account for people who like old school games in terms of like having a hard mode or advanced or higher damage, like that kind of modifier, like tweaking into that extent?
No. No. I don't think there's any plans for that right now. I mean, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think there will be there'll be some health upgrades. So I think people could do. Yeah, I feel like that would be mostly in the realm of the way that people do kind of challenge runs of like Final Fantasy games or something, where they like don't level up this or that, or
I think the best. Yeah, we don't have any options planned. I mean, I could easily add something. If we have time, things could be easily added, like, one hit you die mode or something. Or like 2 hits you die. But there will be I think there will be a little bit of optional content that might be kind of hard. We're not sure yet. But right now, the scope of the game is just kind of for one standard difficulty and then an option to make it a little bit easier. Yeah.
Will there be like any collectibles or things to like hunt around while you're doing 3D platforming?
There isn't. Well, there is, but I can't talk about it too much because of spoilers. but not to the extent of a game like Spyro. So it definitely is not a collectathon in that sense, but we are planning on there to be some stuff to find in 3D, of which we can't say anything about. But I don't think, no, it's not, we can't frame it as a game like, it's not to the extent of like finding moons in Odyssey or finding dragons in Spyro or gems in Spyro.
All right.
The way, yeah, it's a more kind of like a NPC character exploration driven 3D world rather than like Banjo-Kazooie or Jak and Daxter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last question from Oscar: how further into the retro graphics you think you will be going for future games, and any stop point where you think it's no longer considered, I guess, retro anymore?
I guess we're probably open to any kind of art style. I'm not sure. I can't predict what we will be interested in 1 year or after Anodyne 2. I do think that this kind of PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 era 3D graphics is a very accessible art style from production and technical, and it's very interesting to look at. So I expect we would be exploring that more. Game Boy Advance era graphics are always nice because you have a lot of color choices. There's enough resolution to really have a wide variety of geometry and forms on the screen. So I think those will always kind of remain very interesting to explore. I don't know if we'll go further back than, say, the Game Boy or further back than the Super Nintendo. It just kind of depends on what happens in the future.
All right. Very quick question. Ferdinand asks, the preview build that you sent out to press and people like that, will there be a demo for Anodyne 2 at some point?
We haven't decided yet. Demos are they're actually a pretty hotly debated thing in
oh yes,
I guess from a business sense, because there's really no good data on whether they help or kind of hurt. I think Anodyne 2's demo is really good though, so maybe it could help, but we wouldn't decide anything about that until closer to release, so probably not for a few months.
Yeah, and that's another hour discussion we could have right now if we're not careful. But
yeah, there was a demo for Anodyne 1. I don't think it helped. I don't think it hurt either. But I also don't think we marketed it with the demo being available as a thing. I can't remember. Maybe we did, but I think nowadays of streaming and YouTube being more ubiquitous, maybe having a demo would be nice. But I haven't decided for sure yet.
All right. But I think with that, let's wrap things up for tonight. Sean and Marina, it was great having you both on. Best of luck with Anodyne 2.
Thank you.
Not a problem. For people watching us live or record right now, do you have an estimated time for when the game will be released?
We have recently announced May, so look out for it in a few months, hopefully. If things go to plan, we'll see. If things don't go to plan, it'll definitely still be this year.
Okay.
But we're aiming for May.
And I played it on Steam. Will it be available on any other platforms?
We right now, Cartridge and itch.io are confirmed. Probably Humble. We're hoping for GOG, but that requires an approval process, which we're in the middle of, so we'll see. I am interested in Switch, Xbox One, PS4, but that's a lot harder, and we're looking for. We're still exploring opportunities for what exactly to do there.
All right. And for both of you, do you have any social media you would like to plug right now before I do my little end of video or end of stream speech?
Yeah, I think you just type our handles into the chat.
Yeah.
So I'm at SEAN_HTCH, Sean HTCH on Twitter. I'll type that into chat.
Okay.
And Marina is at.
I am at even_KEI. I just put it in chat.
There we go. Mojo's a big fan of Smash TV that we just played. That'll be another retro game.
Oh yeah, that's that game that Isaac was kind of based on, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I played a little of that.
There are the links for everybody right there in chat.
I super don't have the brain for like a procedural. I guess Smash TV isn't, but I was thinking along the lines of Isaac. I don't have the brain for like procedural generation really. I just like what Sean likes to play. My brain was mostly thinking in terms of like a overall like linear story experience. I don't know.
I think that's I may need to get a new chair too. I'm gonna probably wear this one out. But I won't keep both of you any longer than we need to. Again, we could stay for another 3-4 hours, or maybe we'll have to get up and stretch a few times in between. But we are going to wrap things up for tonight. Again, thank you both for coming on. Best of luck with Anodyne 2, and can't wait to try out the full version when it comes out later this year.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us, and thanks for answering questions, chat.
No, thanks, chat. Good chat. Yeah.
All right, so for everybody watching us right now, we're going to end the stream here for this moment. But if the both of you are interested in the future, we can certainly have you back on to talk more about Anodyne or about any of the other game design topics.
Okay, yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
All right. So for everybody watching us right now, if you'd like to follow me, I'm on Twitter at GWBicer. If you'd like to continue this discussion, we have our Discord link down below. And this video or this podcast will go up in recorded form later on, with Patreon backers getting early and ad-free access. But that's all I gotta say for now. I'll be back on later tonight for our regular game stream. But for everybody else watching, thank you for tuning in, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where examine the art and science of games. Until our next stream, take care and have a great night.
Bye.